One team that I was really watching out for this past weekend at the Seattle home series was, in fact, the Minnesota RØKKR. And the reason that I had for this team, the reason why I thought that was for a multitude of different reasons, right? The primary one being that I felt that Seattle was the RØKKR's best chance of winning a home series for the rest of the season. Because if you look at the remaining schedule for the Minnesota RØKKR, it isn't a pretty sight, right? As they have arguably one of, if not the most difficult schedule for the remainder of the season leading up into champs. And we'll cover that, right? The first stop that they have is going to be their own home series, June 5th to the 7th. They aren't getting any handouts here, right? They're not getting any handouts when it comes down to their own home series group stage, as their group consists of the Dallas Empire, Atlanta FaZe, and Seattle Surge. Arguably the two best teams in the world right now in Dallas and Atlanta. June 19th to the 21st at the Paris home series, they will not be in attendance. We move on, right? July 10th to the 12th, the New York home series. They'll be playing in a group with the Subliners, Chicago Huntsmen, and London Royal Ravens. The Huntsmen and Ravens currently off of a hot grand final appearance and look great with their newest additions. The Subliners are pretty much a difficult matchup for the RØKKR as they've recently beat them 3-0 at the Florida home series. July 17th to the 19th, the London home series. They will not be playing there either. And finally, July 10th through the 12th, the Toronto home series. They will be in a group with Atlanta and Dallas, along with the Florida Mutineers. Again, two of the best teams in the world in Atlanta and Dallas, along with a Florida roster that most likely should improve with the new addition of Awakening, who will probably have some decent reps coming into what will be the final home series of the year. Out of the 5 remaining events of the season, the RØKKR will only be playing in 3 of those, right? And 2 out of those 3, they have to worry about arguably the best 2 teams in the world right now, the Dallas Empire and the Atlanta FaZe. And the other, they have to worry about 2 teams who just made a grand final. London, who looked like a top 4 team with the newest edition of Zero. Chicago, who looked like a top 4 team with the newest edition of Prestini, a team that predicted by many, myself included, probably should get better throughout the remainder of the season. They should only get better as time goes on. So no, I don't like this schedule at all for the RØKKR, and I think they very well might have severely hurt themselves for seeding for the remainder of the year. I mean, based on the way that they look right now, if we're going off recent tournament play, right, which has the ability to, of course, change up, but if we're forecasting, Minnesota, realistically and very well, may only get 20 points for the rest of the season. If we're looking back at the schedule, I see them beating Seattle at the next home series, of course, at their next homestand in Minnesota. In New York, I don't know if you can comfortably say they'll beat the Subliners right now, and I don't know if you can say that they can beat the Ravens either. And when it comes down to Toronto, I'll give it to them that they can probably beat Florida, but that's kind of it right now, right? 20 points across the next 5 events surely is going to lower them more and more in the standings. So yes, I think the Minnesota RØKKR very much have hurt themselves at a time where they couldn't be vulnerable. So the question remains, is it time for the RØKKR to hit the panic button? That's a question that I've been seeing a lot throughout Reddit posts, a little bit on Twitter as well. A few people asking, is it time for the RØKKR to kind of worry based on the way that they've looked at the last 2 events? Now, in order to answer the question of, is it time to hit the panic button, I would need to figure out what your definition of panic is, right? Has it become more difficult on the RØKKR? Of course it has. But I wouldn't classify Minnesota under teams who currently aren't playing well and don't look great in terms of standings leading into champs. Because teams like the Gorillas, teams like the Surge, those are rosters that I would label in panic mode. Teams that aren't showing any upside and really haven't shown a lot of upside. Teams that are starting to pretty much have the rest of the season catch up to them a little bit, right? Those are teams that I would list under the panic button mode. I don't think the RØKKR currently nor will belong in that conversation throughout the remainder of the season. But if you are Minnesota during what should be a very difficult final 3 events, at the very least, you can hold on to what you have accomplished so far throughout the year, right? The fact that you currently sit in fourth place in the standings. Now, while I do believe that will change up, that isn't enough for me to give enough concern to say, all right, this team needs a change. All right, this team needs something drastically to happen in order for them to perform well at any of the remainder of the events, right? That's not where I'm at right now with the Minnesota RØKKR. But this team still does need to improve, right? This team does need to fix issues that they have ran into ever since they lost to the Mutineers in the grand finals at the Dallas home series, right? Since that series, in the matches that they have lost to Toronto 3-1, New York 3-0, Optic 3-2, and later 3-0 in the rematch, as well as Chicago 3-0. Now, don't get me wrong. They have had some close matches, right? Despite what the records look like. But that teamwork and that communication that this team has been labeled as having more than a lot of other rosters, it's not getting them over the edge the same way that it used to previously, right? It either isn't where it used to be, or teams are starting to catch up. Minnesota RØKKR are starting to fall behind. And I believe that it's a mixture of both, right? This was a team coming into the year that on paper by no means looked like a slay-heavy team. And listen, the thing that scares me the most is that we have seen this pattern before, right? Teams that expressed better teamwork, teams that understand the fundamentals of the game, that understood vetoes before everybody else, that understood different elements of the maps. Traditionally, in Call of Duty history, those teams get caught up by talent toward the end of the season, right? The same knowledge that you had, those other rosters start to learn those things as the season goes on and on. This roster was known by how they can slow down the game, by how they can slow down other fast rosters. Listen, the meta has only gotten faster since then. And we'll see how the gentlemen's agreements begin to affect that. But this is something Minnesota are really going to have to work on, right? I think the RØKKR are going to have to hit the drawing board hard ahead of their own home series. Because as we've clearly stated, their schedule doesn't get easier. And there is a reason for why they have to fix their problems ahead of what I'm currently looking at, probably 20 points for the rest of the year if they don't improve. Because they need to figure out how to utilize GodRx properly again. Because to start the season, to start off the first 3 home series, he was averaging a 1.28 overall KD to now sitting at a 0.89 in the last 2 events. And for a Slayer to have that kind of drop off shows that definitely something is off. They've been losing to teams that have great Slayers, but as we've discussed, they have to overcome that the way that they did at the start of the season. They have to get to the same level of clutching that they used to. They're seeing round 11s often. 4 out of the 5 maps of Search and Destroy that they've played recently have gone to overtime, and they've only won 1 of those. Don't even get me started on the full sale that we saw not long ago to the Huntsman. They're also losing maps they traditionally were good at, right? Losing 3 straight Azir Cave hardpoints in Seattle, losing 3 straight Hackney Doms. Minnesota, is it time to hit the panic button? No, but it absolutely is time to go back to the drawing board and solve why teams have begun to figure you out, right? Why these rosters are starting to pick up on your map choices, shut down your Slayers, take away your clutch ability. Listen, I get that we've seen teams with Assault and Silly make crazy runs toward the end of the season previously, right? Make crazy runs at Call of Duty Champs, right? Referencing that Evil Geniuses run back in World War II. But there's a reason why it's considered one of the craziest runs in Call of Duty history. Because if you want to put faith in something like that, be my guest. Because under those circumstances, I'll say this. If you want to put faith behind something like that, feel free to, because under the circumstances that something like that took, I'm sure that we'll probably not see something be replicated like that again. For the pieces to fall where they did in order for that to be accomplished, I'm not willing to put my faith into something like that to say, yep, they can do it again, right? Toward the end of the year, they absolutely can have that same very, very intricate type of results that they needed in order to get to the level of which they did. I'm not willing to put faith in that again, right? The Minnesota RØKKR will continue to be one of my most watched teams throughout the remainder of the season, because they very well may not get another chance to be in a grand final or to return to the same form that they were at the start of the year.